Hello again, music lovers. This is Ben Elman.
And this is Robert Mercurio.
This is the Tipitina's Record Club podcast.
Yeah, our second one.
Yeah, we're still doing it.
Yeah, we're rolling now.
In case you're unaware, the Tipitina's Record Club is a bi-monthly vinyl record subscription service where we curate gems from the Gulf South and New Orleans, music that maybe has never before been heard, legacy artists, reissues,
Live shows.
Yeah,
I never heard live shows, and some new material sometimes.
So if you're not a member, please think about joining. You will not be upset about it, and it's a gift that will last a year to yourself or a loved one.
Yeah, give yourself that gift. You deserve it. And today we are covering the Eddie Bo record, the other side of Eddie Bo, and our guest is Brice Nice, DJ Brice Nice, a.k.a. Brice White, and he is super knowledgeable about Eddie Bo and a lot of things New Orleans music. He's a crate digger, a freelance DJ, a WWOZ DJ, and actually one of the owners of the New Orleans Record Press who presses our records. So
he made zillions of phone calls and dug up some people and wrote some really wonderful liner notes for this release.
Yeah, so we got him together today with us to talk about it.
All right, everybody, this is called the Step with Step. Just come on in and listen to the instructions at the blow of the whistle.
We are here with DJ Brice Nice. Thanks for being here, man.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're new at this podcast thing, so thanks for being patient.
It's pretty cool. You guys have built a really great thing with this record club and everything else. So I think the podcast is a natural addition. So looking forward to listening and being a part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we maybe should just jump right into talking about this Eddie Bo record because, man, this one seems like it's like the rarest of all the rare New Orleans records.
It's funny because when I was writing some of this, I was like constantly checking myself because I don't want to say that, I'm like a record like lunatic, sometimes, and so like I don't be like this is the rarest. It's probably the rarest LP that I could find from New Orleans that I know about, at least at this point. Maybe most desirable. There might be some one-off thing, but in terms of records that you can find, like it's very hard to find this record.
And like you go to Discogs and it's, the last available copy was $3,000 or something.
Yes. And it's been high for a long time. There's certain records that have really crazily increased in value in the last few years. This record has consistently been high for a long time. It's been hard to find forever.
So why do you think that is? Do you think it was like a pressing thing? Like, did they just press limited copies and then release it in New Orleans? And that's why there's like, oh yeah, you could find a couple copies here in New Orleans.
This record didn't make any waves at the time. Why? I don't know. He released it. I think he put his all into it. It was hard to convey this and trying to explain it, trying to go back and read. He really put, is from what I can tell, and I talked about the way that Eddie took a break sort of before he recorded this LP. I think he really committed to this concept, and it didn't hit at all, and that was hard for him. And so, like, I can't even figure out where it went. There's one review from the time that I could find in any publication, and I believe it was in... I think it was in the States Item. I'd have to go back and double check exactly, but there was one review at the time. It didn't get a mention in any paper I could find. The Tribune, the Data Weekly,
Crazy.
States Item, anything.
You think that's like a product of like he didn't have, like he was his own label at the time, so he didn't have like...
Which was rare at that time, really,
right,
to have your own label.
Well, except here, though, too, like guys like Toussaint and stuff had labels forever, too. So in a way, like, yes, it was a time of more commercial labels really pushing the disco sound, pushing a rock sound that obviously New Orleans was not known for at the time. But he speculates that if you were local at the time, you couldn't get any traction. That's from interviews that I read with him at the time. Mm-hmm. Of course, there were some people that did, but when we think about New Orleans music at this time, who made it in the sort of R&B world, there was the throwback stuff. Professor Longhair was playing a lot at that time, so there was a lot of respect for that era. But like Eddie was trying to push it forward, and with the exception of like Toussaint and Chocolate Milk and a few other folks, Meters obviously were heavy duty at that time. There wasn't a whole lot else that the city is known for in the late 70s into the 80s in the soul and R&B world. Of course Meters is huge, and of course Toussaint is huge.
Right.
But not a lot else. And I know he just said he couldn't get any traction because it was considered a local record, where to me, the sound of this record has local reference for sure, but it is not pigeonholed into a New
No, it
Orleans
doesn't
sound.
sound like a New Orleans
it's
record
way,
much.
yeah. Considering his last release was really the Check Your Bucket thing, which was super New Orleans sounding, this record's like totally different. And do you think, that he approached this because of technology changes since the last record? I mean, it was more that when Check Your Bucket, that was like a whole band all in the room at the same time kind of vibe of recording. This is now late 70s. You had multi-tracks, you had production at your fingertips, and it definitely has more of a layered, more conceptual approach, I feel like.
Yes, and but from everything I understand, it was cut probably in one day in a live room with very little overdub.
Oh.
From what I can tell and from what I hear from, just the one person I was able to interview, Dr. Cheryl Keys, about this, she overdubbed a flute part on the second track, which is called Searching for the Real Thing, which was co-written by John Fernandez, the Xavier professor and arranger. Other than that, what the guys who ran Ultrasonic at the time remember is almost everything was cut live. Only maybe vocals would be overdubbed and maybe something like a flute or something.
Wow.
Everything else they seem to think was cut live, which is hard to imagine listening to this record because
especially with those back row vocals.
Yeah,
like, how could you do that in a room with like a band playing? It seems difficult. But.
Well, the one that blows my mind is, like half the tracks are instrumental, and there's what Dr. Key says is 3 saxophones playing at the same time. It is so clean. I don't know what you think as a professional in this area. Like, could that have been live? It's so harmonious.
Well, in your liner notes, you talked about how Cheryl was saying that they were like crack studio pro dudes. She came in with charts. So, Eddie Bo probably had the right dudes in there who weren't going to clam it.
To his credit, to Eddie Bo's credit, he seemed to always surround himself with some amazing musicians.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, he kind of let them do what they were going to do. Like, you take a tune like Hook and Sling, and there's not even piano on that track. It's like, that was
It's like
him.
That's all James Black, right?
I mean, I think so. And that's...
Is there a contention as to who played drums on Hook and Sling? Am I wrong?
I don't
have to check.
No, you might. I think you're right. I would say you're right. When I went back and checked my interviews with Eddie, now I'm not going to say Hook and Sling. There was one other guy that's in the running for that, Bobby Williams. Now, Bobby Williams was on the 7B recordings. He has a 7-inch called the Bobby Williams Group. They have, I think, 2 7-inches. One is called Boogaloo Mardi Gras or something like that. I'm telling you the wrong name right now. I'm going to come back to that. But he's got 2 7-inches on there. He was a drummer. He has 1 7-inch from the late 70s. And there's a place where Eddie said it was him and another place where he said it was James Black.
Oh, we call Stanton on the phone right now. I'm sure he has a very strong
because he
opinion.
can tell by the... Yeah, so I'm sure he would be right. I mean, the other thing is with this stuff, constantly, it's hard to know, and Eddie didn't always remember. One thing that's funny in this is I called Benny Grunch to ask about this record because I called everybody who said, oh, maybe check with this guy. Check with this guy. Benny Grunch played on some sessions at Ultrasonic at this time. He played on a Clifton Chenier record, I believe, that was recorded in 78. He played bass. I was like, maybe he's the bass player. He's like, I was a bass player on Check Your Bucket, which I never heard that before.
Whoa, I never knew that.
I know, and I never heard it until now. And Eddie didn't say otherwise, so I'm not, so I believe that. And he recorded it at Night Studio. So back in the day, Eddie recorded mostly on Metairie Road at Night Studio with Tracy Borges or Bojazz, or however you say it. And he had his studio guys, and Benny was one of them. He's like, Tracy would call me sometimes. How do we not know that?
Yeah, that seems, I mean, how does he not have that on a
Benny
shirt that he walks around with?
Benny Grunch and the Bunch.
For those of you who don't know, has been a staple of New Orleans.
I played
music
bass
and
on
society gigs for many years.
Check Your Bucket. I mean, come on, I would.
And 12 Yats of Christmas is really
yes.
has become his signature tune. Now, when I was talking to Benny about that, of course, his biggest tune, but he had one back in the 70s called Spirit of Smiley Lewis, which was like a WTIX or whatever the classic New Orleans radio. He's known for those things too. What's funny is, guess who's on? Well, this was another thing that came up at the time. Is Torkanowski is one of the voices on 12 Yats of Christmas. I've yet to talk to him about
which
that.
one?
Which one?
I don't know. That's what I gotta go back and find.
We gotta ask Tork. Yeah.
But I'm sorry, this is
That's
how
so
it goes
good,
down the rabbit hole. But I was going down the rabbit hole trying to figure out who. So yes, James Black is who we all universally understand played on those early records. But we don't know who the drummer is on this record.
Yeah.
And we don't know who the sax player is. And I've called every session sax guy I could find and I can't figure it out. I still can't figure out who played bass.
Yeah, the bass player's sick on the record.
It's so
too.
sick. It
Oh my
comes in
God.
hot.
It's so good. It's like, yeah. I mean, it's such a tragedy in that era that they didn't put better notes of who played on stuff. But
I know, and it's a shame that James Black isn't getting paid for all the samples. If it was James Black, you know,
Well, he definitely wasn't on this album, as
Right,
far
no,
as we
yeah.
can tell.
Yeah.
But for all those other ones,
you're saying Hook and Sling.
yeah, and to
Check
go
Your
back for
Bucket.
anybody who doesn't know, Hook and Sling, I looked it up today. I think it was sampled 91 times on different artists, you know. LL Cool J, Mama Said Knock You Out.
I didn't even realize.
I didn't know that either. I learned that today. But, I mean, you Google it. It's like a huge list. This song has been in so many hip-hop songs, and it's just, and that drum break, you know, it's one of the things.
And
it's known for.
the drum breaks on, you know, the Thang. Some of these ones that were also really hard to find. There's one called Showdown, which I would say when, you know, like, is it the rarest LP? Yes, but like Eddie Bo has a rare 45 called Showdown. Doesn't even have the name on the record. It's impossible to find. He's got that Lover and a Friend break on 7B. He did this record with Inez Cheatham, a singer. And the break on that, I think, is James Black. I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
You know, I could go off on this. So
I mean, that just brings me back to just he really surrounded himself with top-notch musicians. Sometimes, like, I mean, even on the opening track of the record, Don't Stop It, there's no keyboard chords on that at all. So it's like he was, you know, revered as an amazing musician, but in a way, I don't feel like he maybe was getting his due as a songwriter, producer, collaborator, you know, in that kind of world. Maybe he was, but to me, it's not like he's not getting the Alan Toussaint level of like that. He really knew how to put a group together and how to record records. And stuff like
I
that.
agree 100%. When I went back and tried to just give enough of a history for folks who aren't familiar, because I do think people who pick up this record, there's going to be a bunch of people who know Eddie Bo is, people locally, people who are into the music, you know, maybe into that era of funk. But there's going to be a bunch of people who probably maybe don't know, and I wanted to sort of show that trajectory. And when you look at, like, when he ran a label with an owner like Banishak and they ran 7B, his signature is on every record. Like, there's no debate that, like, Bo was involved in all these records. So I think your point, yeah, he never really got the credit he deserved. And that's what I think he tried to do in this record, and when he formed Bo Sound and Eboville and all the little sub-labels he made, like, I think he was trying to make his mark. And he did, at this point in time, we can look back and see it, but it didn't manifest commercially for him at all. And I think that was really hard for him.
Yeah, that's sad. And I mean, the 6-7 year break he took at the height of his career, right? I mean, at the height of his success.
You would think, but who knows?
Yeah.
Because those records, like, and you guys remember probably, I mean, you guys have been making music in this vein, right? But, like, there was in the 90s, I remember people started to pay more attention to this. But I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, people really looked for Eddie Bo's late 50s, early 60s stuff. That's what he would do on all the reviews. And if you went and saw him at Jazz Fest, he was more known for that. I feel like it wasn't until a later period that he started more getting attention on his heavy funk stuff, which now I think we look at as so iconic. I don't know how you...
Well, maybe that probably has something to do with all the sampling. You know, all the hip hop artists that were sampling, you know, his breaks and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that brought him into a whole new audience.
And to me, it was the time of CD reissues, so you could more easily get a Hook and Sling. You could get, you know, Check Your Buckets, all that stuff that was hard to hear before. But that's interesting that that's what he gravitated towards in his reviews. You know, was that 50s stuff.
I think that's where a lot of folks made their money, right? Like Earl King, anybody who was kind of still around in the 90s. There was a real low point, I feel like, in the 80s where guys weren't getting as much work. I mean, I don't know if that's good to talk about or not, but it was tough, you know? There's always these stories of... And that's why a lot of these guys who came in and bought out people's catalogs were able to get them for cheap, because really at that time, a lot of these guys had nobody interested in their music, particularly the funkier stuff. and they let it go cheap a lot of times.
Yeah.
And then a couple years later, it blew up, and that hurt them later.
Yeah.
I wonder if that exploitation, actually, of their catalogs by people in other states had something to do with it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, that is that thing about does that come back around. I think for artists that were able to keep a piece of it, that was a benefit. I think Willie T kept a piece of it. I think there's some other guys who have.
Yeah. But
and
when
that
he
worked.
took his break was in the early 70s, so it was before all that. And it's just to become a carpenter, and I mean, it's like this amazing talent. There's just so many mysteries, as you said in your liner notes, centered around this record and his life and stuff.
Well,
like
it
that.
is cool to see him as a carpenter, and I talked to him a little bit about that. So I didn't, I mentioned it in the liner notes, but I'll say it here. In like about 2003, I spent a bunch of time with him in his cafe, which was called Check Your Bucket on Bank Street. So that's
What was that like? Like, I know you couldn't go into so much detail. I never went there. Did you ever go there, Ben?
What year did it close?
I think it just closed at Katrina. It may have closed right before Katrina. It definitely got destroyed in Katrina. It was just a little cinder block building, and Eddie got it, and they converted it to the Check Your Bucket Cafe. And it was just like a lunch spot, but he would also play there at night on maybe Fridays and Saturdays, which is a theme that also kept coming back up because he did that in the 70s.
Yeah.
Well, I remember seeing him on a weekly at Margaritaville. Do you remember
Yeah.
I
that?
saw that he did. I didn't go, but I
Yeah.
saw it all through the 90s, or early
Yeah.
90s maybe.
He also had like a
Every- like,
Bourbon
wa-
Street
every-
stint too in the
Yeah, yeah.
90s. I remember Jeff's wife Eva worked at a bar that he would perform at all the
Yeah.
time.
Well, and going back in the 60s, he for sure did that. And then he probably, I think he's had so many different incarnations. I couldn't find this one. Guitar Slim Jr. said that there was a spot on Chapatulas. I haven't been able to find that. I don't know if he had a spot on Chapatulas back then. He remembered that there was a regular spot. And then there's a spot on Broad that he had in the 70s that he bought. And then they would have shows. It was called Eddie Bo's Heritage Patio. And then they got some money, which in the newspaper says he hit at the track.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that was a
love
really
that.
funny tidbit in your liner notes.
That was
got a
Like,
tip?
how much do you
Yeah.
think he was betting to make enough to buy a hotel, right?
Well, no, they owned it already. He said he won $8,000 at the track that day, and that's what he invested into the
renovate
renovation
it.
of the
Yeah.
hotel.
Okay, we're talking 80s money?
78.
Oh, yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
that's
That's
a
a
lot of
decent
money.
chunk to
Yeah.
make a
Yeah.
renovation. They already owned it.
Yeah.
So,
It seems
He was like
so
betting his
70s
house.
to me.
That's what I'm getting at. He was like betting his house at the track.
well, yeah, and what kind of tip did he get, and how did
Yeah.
he get it? But he was apparently at that moment pretty down on his luck. They had been trying to make this thing work, and I think it was right at the time that this record had come out and didn't hit. And then that happened, and I guess they had another possibility, because then they came back in 79 and recorded another LP. So it's kind of mind-blowing.
Oh, right. Kind of in the same direction.
Right, totally.
A little more disco-y, right? Or more.
A little more disco-y, and with a lot more musicians. And that one has all the musicians lined up on the back of the LP. You can read it. None of which played on the first one, which is the mind blower for me.
wow.
Except for the guy John Fernandez, who I feel like is somebody that's really blown my mind in this. He passed in 1983 so young. He was like 49.
Oh, wow.
He had grew up in New Orleans. Then he went to college, came back, and was a band teacher at high schools. And then he was the Xavier teacher for like 25 years. And everyone spoke so highly of him, who I talked to about it.
You said Eddie Bo said he was the best trumpet player in New Orleans, right? That's a high mark to reach in this city full of trumpet players.
And how did none of us know him?
yeah, right. Never heard of him.
Yeah.
So Eddie doubles down. He has not a lot of success with this record. This is the other side of Eddie Bo. And then a year later, he doubles down even more on the same sound.
And
it's interesting. I mean, I guess he really wanted to see this vision through.
It's a little different, though. What's the name of the other record?
So it's the other side of Eddie Bo and Watch for the Coming.
Yeah, Watch for the Coming's a little bit different, though, stylistically. It seems like he kind of is going a little more for what was current.
I think he is doing that. I think a couple years later, it's a different moment. The thing that always drives me nuts about it is there's that one kind of like country hoedown song that I can't really figure out. That's kind of like if you check it out, it's kind of like a disco country number.
Yeah, I know
so
what
was
you're
that
talking about.
because he was into that, or he was like trying to reach a market?
Yeah.
You know. But the great songs on it to me are great. And they're sort of referential to the first LP for sure. It's definitely more orchestrated, more arranged. There's more players and more instruments and stuff like that.
I mean, I think he kind of, strangely enough, even though he had his own sound and his own vision, he kind of seemed like he was chasing sometimes like there's the single Funky Yeah, which
Okay.
is like a rock song. It's straight up like
Yeah.
just you know.
That's
and
a
it's-
mind blower.
And you're like, this is in that era when he's playing, you know, Check Your Bucket. He's playing Hook Your or recording those tunes, and then this tune comes on, sounds almost like a British Invasion kind of, you know, like guitar-driven, heavy eighth note.
That one, and one credit to it, a guy called Doug Anderson, who I think is like maybe a made up name, called "Hey Mama, Here Comes a Preacher."
Yeah,
just like
that one's awesome. That's just like a drone the
Who's
whole
the
time.
guitar player? I need to know.
Bung, bung, gung, dung, 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 dung. Yeah, that one's killer. I love that one.
I think some of these he did make arrangements in those cases with this guy Shelley Pope, who was a DJ. Have you guys heard about him? I think they called him the Black Pope. He was like a super character.
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
He's like the A&R on both those records, I think. And maybe he had a deal with House of the Fox, Maceo's. I think it was Maceo's record, or Maceo had records on there. Maybe it wasn't his label. It was out of Nashville, maybe, or something.
Well, Brice, why don't you, like, you know, you really hung with him a lot, right? And
Yeah, how did you get to know him?
yeah.
Yeah, but I miss this era, man. This is the thing that's driving me nuts about this liner notes, is like I totally breezed over it. And my whole point of doing that back then was I was like, you know, so, you know, I tell this in another story, and I'll just quick say it. And also, if I'm really long-winded, you guys can stop me anytime. But, you know, I found a copy of Hook and Sling. I didn't know anything about this. Probably 98, 99 at Thrift City, used to be on Carrollton and Tulane Avenue back before Katrina.
So like a 7-inch.
A 7-inch of Hook and Sling. I go there to look for records. I was always digging for records in thrift stores. I wasn't buying them at high dollar. I was just finding what I could find.
Dope.
And I got that thing home, and I was like we talked about earlier, I was like, what is this?
Oh, like I didn't know.
Kinda,
You just saw the label. You said,
Yeah.
hey, let me take it home.
Take it home. I listened to Soul 45s, about punk rock records, whatever. But I was into like punk rock and hardcore hip hop, and of course I loved like the big soul records that I knew. But I didn't really know this whole world. And when that drum break hits in the beginning, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So funky.
It felt like a punk rock record, or like
the
like a
attitudes.
Public Enemy record
Yeah.
or something. Like the drums are hitting so hard.
Yeah.
So I started getting kind of obsessive about it and picking up his records anytime I saw them. And I didn't really know about that world yet. It opened up a new world to me about New Orleans R&B and soul, and how raw it was, and how it was the music of the streets, you know? Like, I love the music of the streets at any time, you know? Or I don't always love it, but I learned from it, or I listened to it, or whatever. And the New Orleans streets in the late 90s were different. It was Cash Money, and it was No Limit had just been out, and it was brass bands in the street and stuff like that, and punk rock for me and other things. But that sort of opened this door that blew my mind. So I started going crazy about it. I couldn't find any information about that era from him, just like we're talking about now, how it's an iconic era, but there wasn't really anything written about him. But he just opened a cafe, like literally 8 blocks from my house. So I'm like going to go ask him about it. And I pitched it to Wax Poetics. And this is in like the first year of Wax Poetics magazine. And I was like, can I write a story about Eddie Bo? Because like we're all talking about these records. Like he's referential to hip hop and DJ culture and soul and everything.
Yeah.
But like there's nothing about this part. You can read about the 50s and 60s and that's it. So I just like, and he was so gracious. He was just a sweetheart.
Yeah.
And he was in the cafe most days. He didn't cook. Other people cooked. But like he was pretty much there every day. Went in there, just asked him, and then ended up, I have hours of recordings, but he wouldn't let me do it on video. It's only audio. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, I'm like, I've had other guys do that too. I'm like, why didn't I insist, ask him, obviously permission, but I wish it was on video.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I just spent days with him in there and playing records. I'd bring my little portable and play records because I'd be like, well, what about this one?
Yeah.
Because like we don't know about this. And then he'd, some of the people on these records were real people that like just happened to be cut 1 or 2 records, and other ones were made up names that he used as I don't even know why he did it necessarily. It wasn't like always to get around. Like back in the day, a lot of guys cut records.
Well, there's the Naomi Neville, right? The Alan Toussaint.
Publishing.
Sure,
issues
publishing.
usually, right?
Yeah, you had deals, you couldn't do it. But
Yeah.
at this time, he was on his own label, so why did he do it? I don't know.
Right.
Maybe because it seemed like too much Eddie Bo wouldn't sell, so if you got a guy called Percy Stone...
That was his other name?
Well, that was just 145 that he did. It's kind of a legendary... It's not Eddie Bo singing. It might be a guy called Percy Stone, but like no one's ever met Percy Stone, so it's... We don't know. And Eddie didn't really I think he didn't remember.
Yeah.
Now, I'll say sometimes I might not remember right now, so I'm just going off here, you guys. But
Yeah.
this is from his memory and my memory and checking the notes from that. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm going off now, too. I don't remember where we were, but...
I was just thinking, yeah, you're talking
How
about
you were
going to the
getting to know
cafe.
him, which I
yeah.
think is amazing. I love listening to this because I will say in New Orleans, I mean, I showed up in New Orleans in '89, and there were so many like legends still living, and that older generation of musicians, whether they were famous or not, but just like family generational musicians or whatever, they were just very welcoming to discuss and hang out and mentor.
Yeah.
You know, it felt like it was really a thing, you know, and the fact that you're like, oh, yeah, well, Eddie Bo, he's got a cafe around the corner, and I'll just go talk to him. I mean, it's just
they
amazing.
were so approachable. It was awesome. I mean, that's how we met Houseman.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he was just like, hey.
Which, you know,
Yeah.
Houseman, I love his 1982 record, by the way, Holly Grove.
Yeah.
That's like one of my favorite records.
Yeah.
So, like, I only saw him then with you guys maybe a couple times, and, like, it didn't even click maybe at the time until later that he was in Holly Grove, even though
Right.
you guys probably knew, but, like, it just didn't click, you know? And, like, that doesn't really get any attention, although people do like that
Oh,
record.
yeah. I mean, I don't think
Not
it was...
going for $3,000.
It's not, but it's going for 100 or
Yeah.
so.
It was fun. When we went to Japan with Houseman,
Yeah.
that's where they knew that band.
Totally.
We would show up to a bar, and within 5 minutes, they would, you know, because he's not a typical Japanese-looking guy.
Yeah.
So they like, who is this guy? Blah, 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 figure it out. And then, like, within 5 minutes, they'd have, like, New Orleans Best Kept Secret playing, you know.
I dropped the needle on the record, man. Yeah,
And
they
we'd be like, what? We've never even heard this music.
Right.
Houseman's like, I don't even have a copy of this record anymore. But in Japan, they're like, you know,
Totally.
they know who he is. They know,
Yeah.
you know, the whole history, the whole thing. It's just, it blows my mind how much they dig into our history more than we do.
The thing about being approachable, that was one thing about being on the radio here and WWOZ. I started subbing at WWOZ like around this time, actually 2003 or something, before I got my own show, maybe in 2006, I think. But I used to sub for Soul Sister's show all the time, Soul Power. Obviously, we all know it, love it. She's like been doing it longer than a lot of folks. I think it's 25 years plus. Wow. I've learned so much. That's the reason I went to OZ. I'd been on TUL for years, and I was like, a friend introduced me to Soul Sister, and I was like, well, if there's anybody who I would love to be able to sub for. So I asked her, you know, do you ever need somebody on the days that you're not able to be there?
Yeah.
She was like, yeah, I need somebody consistent or whatever. So, man, as soon as I started playing these records on the radio, people be calling me up like, that's my record. That's my brother. You
Wow.
know, James Winfield, what do they call him? Is it the Sleeping Giant? There's a blues player, and his brother has a record. I think it's Raymond Winfield, called "Things Will Get Better," and it's the same underlying track as Dap Walk,
Which
by
was Ernie Vincent.
Yeah, Ernie Vincent,
Yeah.
right? And Ernie Vincent's on the cover of Living Blues this month, which is really cool.
Oh, wow.
So he's, you know, getting some of his due, but. Anyway, just to say that, guys would just always be calling. Like, that's how I met a lot of people. There's a great record label called Rosemont that I've been obsessively cataloging for years, and we're going to reissue this stuff hopefully this year. And
Sick.
I'm going to share it with you guys when it's time.
Thanks.
All
Which we should back up a minute and
Go ahead.
You're the guy that makes our records here.
Well, that's
We
a
should
whole
let
other side.
Our listeners know this, you know, like this is Brice. We know him as Brice Nice, but his day job name is Brice White, one of the owners
Yeah.
of New Orleans Record Press, which makes our records for this record, you know, Tips Record Club, you know.
Drowning in records in every way.
So you're such a big crate digger, you know, lover of vinyl and all things
Yeah.
that are pressed into
Yes,
small,
it's a blessing and a
small
curse,
circles
right?
of plastic, you know.
Yeah.
So it's pretty crazy that you, and then now, you know, you've come full circle as this crate digger, music lover through the 90s and blah, 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 and now you're being able to make your own compilations and stuff like that and press them.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to be on this side of it. Like, it's just to see, you know, like records are this ethereal thing. It's like music captured in a groove, right? You guys make it. We all listen to it. But then at the same time, it's like literally like a factory presses this into plastic.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we do now, and it's kind of mind-blowing to see how it works. It's still kind of magical, honestly, to
Oh,
see it on both sides. It's pretty wild.
It is.
But yeah, no.
Every time I go by, it's just like, can I take a second to just look at it? Because it's if any of these listeners have never been by a record plant press. It's definitely a very cool thing to see.
And hopefully we'll open the door so people can come see it more. You know, folks come by when they make records and stuff, but down the road we'll have more tours and stuff for people because I think it's really fun to see that part of it.
It is. I mean, it takes 30 seconds, 45 seconds?
Yeah, it's like, it's a little under a minute in the full cycle for one record. But yeah, the press itself, it's about, I think it's maybe 40, 45 seconds.
Yeah.
Where it's actually closed, but yeah.
It's really a cool thing to see.
Cool, yeah, thanks. And we're excited. It's so fun to press great records.
Yeah.
That's one thing that's so fun, you know?
For you're pressing this record that I don't know how many years ago you got your first copy of this.
Well, it's funny because when we're talking about this and you think I think you started off, how many copies of this are out there? Where did it go, right? It can't be very many.
Well, I'm still really curious about that. I'm wondering, where was it pressed and how many did they make 300? And that's why, and they only ended up in New Orleans, and that's why it's such a valuable thing, you know?
I don't know, you know,
it didn't have distribution probably, which is maybe one of the reasons why.
I mean, were people printing that small quantities back then?
You know, I have occasionally found ads for things like that. I think they were, but maybe I would have imagined. Yeah, anywhere between 1 and 500. I can't imagine more than 500. I don't know if Floyd's was operating at that time. I think a lot of records at that time got made at Houston or maybe in Tennessee. And then at some point, Floyd's in Ville Platte opened, and I'm not sure if it was at that time. And then most records got made there because it was only 3 hours from here.
Right.
But I can't remember if we know where this one was. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Nobody, I mean, all the people I've asked about it, nobody remembers it. Even existing, basically.
Yeah.
It's the mystery record.
So it is. It's not available on streaming, not available online anywhere.
Not officially ever been reissued until now. So thank you guys.
To all the collectors that own a copy, I hope we didn't devalue your copy.
Well, that's one of those never-ending debates. But the right thing is for people to be able to get it.
Hell yeah!
And thank you guys, because I think people are going to be super excited. I think the people who don't know hopefully will have their minds blown.
Yeah.
And then the people who've been obsessively trying to get a copy but can't.
Yeah, because there's no way to literally. This is the way to hear it.
Totally
on and strangely enough, we might be pressing 6 times the original pressing.
I think you are.
I really wish Eddie was here to see this, moment, and that, his music still is living and people are still into it.
And equally as important now as it was then, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Awesome.
we really appreciate you, and the liner notes were fabulous, and thank you so much.
Yeah, I learned a lot from the
taking
liner
the time,
notes.
and being a part of this.
Thanks, Brice.
Thank you. I learned a lot in the process, and I really, you guys got me on a subject that I just don't shut up about. So thank you for that.
We'll be sure to have you back here at the Tipitina's podcast.
Yeah. Thanks, Brice.
No, thank you all. I appreciate you having me. Thanks for letting me do the liner notes.
Oh, man.
Super cool. Thank you so much, Brice Nice. We really appreciate you
That was really fun.
coming in here and being so damn knowledgeable.
And just wanted to kind of let everybody know what's on the horizon. Our October release is going to be the posthumous album by Walter Wolfman Washington, which Ben Ellman here produced. And it's been working on it for a couple years, and sadly Walter passed, towards the end of making this record. But it's a beautiful record along the lines of the record before, but this one's even more lush. It's got strings, it's got horns, background vocals.
It's thick, and
it's really nice.
Just so excited to be able to put it out on the Tips Record Club label and get it in everyone's hands who's a member of the club right away, and happy to release it to the world, and excited about maybe the next podcast we come on and we'll talk about some of that. Once again, if you're not a member of the club, be sure to check out tipitinasrecordclub.com or tipitinas.com and join the club. We'll see you here next time.
Yep. See y'all.